government because I forgot to talk to them about, are you registered to vote? That's really all I kind of say, is just getting them to go vote. But that also turned out to be a heartbreaking discussion the other day. So, but at the beginning of the semester, they were so interested in so many topics, so I'm confused by this group. I think they've been very affected by the pandemic and by learning through the pandemic, for sure. And I see some positive differences, which I think come from being home and stuck with their parents. They've been talking to adults a lot, so they're pretty verbally articulate. So, you know, more verbally articulate than in the past. But reading and other things, you would think. Being stuck at home, there'd be more time to read, but I don't think that's where people went, young people. Oops, there go my glasses. Yep.
Yeah, education's about becoming a citizen, too.
Right, yeah.
All right, so I would like to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up for questions from you, because we would like to hear from you too. Had to choose, so I guess, what kinds of teachers have been most useful in your development as a writer? And how do you put what they did to use in your own, or did you put it to use in your own classroom? You've already talked a little bit about that.
Go for it. Oh, you want me to talk more about it? Okay. So I think, well, lots of, yeah, because I talked about the workshops and how useful that has been. And I think that through my education, because I've gone to school a lot to become different things and do different things, I've had many different types of teachers. I would start with my parents, my dad especially, this wasn't his job when I knew him, but he did a little bit of editing. So when I was in junior high, as we called it in the olden days, in middle school, I had 3 terrific English teachers in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, all very different from each other, and all really wonderful. And so they were great teachers. And then my father, we wrote essays by hand, and Mrs. Pike made us do an essay every week in 9th grade. And it had to be perfect in every way, meaning like we weren't supposed to have cross-outs. That's impossible when you're writing with ink, you know? But nevertheless, my dad would read my essays and edit them and make me learn. He didn't just like do it and say, here, he made me learn what he was doing. And that was, in retrospect, very helpful, but because we were writing them by hand, he would read them and I had to write it all over, you know. But I learned a lot from those teachers. I had the other teacher, and everyone who had this teacher, we all still say he was the best teacher we ever had. And for me, that includes law school, getting an LLM in tax, and my MFA, all of it, college. My 5th and 6th grade teacher, Robert Martin in Richmond, Indiana, was the best teacher I ever had. And everyone who had him says the same thing, whatever they became later, whether they went beyond high school or way beyond high school. And he was an excellent teacher for writing. He was an excellent teacher for everything. But he encouraged our creativity, but he taught us to diagram the Gettysburg Address. And he made it fun. Like everything was a challenge, everything was fun, and we made him stay after school. And the poor man didn't get home till 6 o'clock most nights, and our parents knew where we all were, like staying after school with Mr. Martin and making him stay, so we could do more stuff. I mean, what 10 and 11-year-olds do that? I mean, it wasn't us, it was all him. He was amazing. And then I've had, as I talked about, you know, some really wonderful teachers. I had some wonderful mentors as a lawyer who helped me, as a appellate writer. I learned so much about like telling a story and doing things over and over again to make sure it was good. But then getting my MFA, I also had some really wonderful teachers, all very different from each other, who taught different things. And one person who said to me, and this was incredibly encouraging, and she had no idea, but through the years I've held on to it, she said to me, just always remember that for you, your writing really comes out in the revision. I already knew about the importance of revision, but sometimes in classes, other people would read things, especially stories, and they were really fully developed. And mine were not necessarily fully developed right at the beginning. And it was just a great thing for her to say. And she was very, you know, she loved my writing, which was also really nice. But she said the first time she read something that I wrote, she said she wasn't so sure if I was gonna be okay. And then she said, then she saw the way that I worked, like sort of, you know, I just would keep building. And she said, kind of comes from you, from the inside out. You don't do it all at once. So all different kinds of things, I think, and different teachers have been really helpful to me. And the main thing I've taken from other people is to try to be very encouraging to my students, to give them a lot of chances, and to teach them the things we talked about before, to work hard, to revise, to know the importance of all of that. So, thanks.
I can't think of a specific teacher. I don't remember any one teacher saying that. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to write and then had 30 years of not writing, and literally because I didn't think anything I could put on page was good enough. And teachers started to say, and I think it is Annie Lamott who wrote Bird by Bird,
Yes.
says, just expect your first draft to be terrible. And then somebody said to me, make your first draft terrible. I could do that. So, you know, I did my best and I knew it would be terrible. And that opened a gateway for me. And I passed that on to my students in the writer's workshop, because many times the kids would say to me, I don't know what to write about. And I'd say, well, write something something terrible. Just put something on the page. Do a drawing and then describe the drawing. And so I don't know who it was who said that to me, but all the times that I've seen it, it helped me break through, and I know it's helped my students break through. Just let your first draft be terrible.
Great advice.
Again, I don't have specific teachers, although my 6th grade teacher really encouraged my writing. A lot of my elementary teachers were actually very helpful to me. And the schools that valued writing, and there were creative writing magazines in both my elementary school and my junior high school. And I wrote for them, and they liked my stories, and I had a sense that they were good. My parents encouraged my writing. This is so embarrassing, but I was maybe 6 or 7, and I would write stories for my younger brothers and to share with my older sister. And then I decided a great money-making scheme would be to go door to door and sell little handwritten stories. I was about 7 or 8. I love it. And my mother, bless her heart, I think she had confidence in the neighbors that they wouldn't like totally crush me or laugh at me. So she said, well, maybe you could charge 5 cents. So I remember going door to door to sell stories for 5 cents a story, you know, and then I realized I'd have to rewrite a new one for the next customer. And my mother probably warned them, oh, she's coming, you know, just be aware. But sort of surprisingly, I think I learned as much from doing writer's workshop and working with other teachers like Marla. I mean, Marla was the brave one. She said, oh, I love that workshop. I'm going to start that with my students. And I said, oh my God, I can't even imagine, but you know, the teacher next to me is going to do it, I better do it too. And so I learned a lot from that. And teachers that were good storytellers, I think, were as important to me as teachers that were specifically teaching me writing. We worked in a middle school together, and the 8th grade social studies teacher, Dr. Gibson, he would come in, he was also a reenactor.
Wow.
So when he taught about different types of times in history, he would come in as, he was a Revolutionary War reenactor, he is one, and he would come in the full thing, and the students would be fascinated. When he talked about the frontier, he came in as, you know, with the whole, you know, leather outfit and the, you know, described the whole outfit, and he made history into a series of stories that were exciting and important to know about, and that had a big influence on me. Was he teaching writing? No. Was he teaching story? Yes. So people I have worked with, I think, have been important. In law school, I had a couple of wonderful teachers who taught about, again, not story so much, but how to make an argument, how to write logically and to proceed with an argument you wish to make so that you convince your reader, to be where you want them to be. So I have not gone to school to get an MFA, but you get a lot if people encourage that imagination and encourage that interest in the stories that you have to tell.
Great. I had a writer at one of the very early Manhattanville summer writers workshops who at the end of the week looked at me and said, "You're a real writer." Now, how do you top that, right? And then two others, Dan Masterson, who died not long ago, taught poetry at Manhattanville for years and years and years. And he was terrific. And it was a workshop, he'd go around the room and Dan would highlight everything in your poem that was good. And he would give it back to you and he would say, "More like that." What a powerful way to learn to write, right? On the other end of the spectrum, there was Pat Gouch, who was I know I'm not supposed to name names, and it's going off on the internet, and there you go, and that's the end of it. Sorry, Pat.
I was with her too, so go ahead. I'm
Okay.
interested in what you have to say.
Who was an editor, a children's book editor in New York, and she was, she was terrific at what she did, and she knew her stuff, but she played favorites, and her criticism was harsh, and I found it very difficult to learn from her. And so I sort of take those as the two pillars, right? This is where I don't want to go, here's where I do want to go, and I try to go here, and I hope that's where I am. Anyway, so thank you guys, you were terrific. This has been really fun. I'd like to open it up to you for any questions that you have for us. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question as you were speaking, because I've taught writing, and I found like the biggest hurdle or the biggest change is when writers are aware of they're trying to show, not tell. And I know that that's, it's almost kind of like the number one thing. Show, don't tell. But it's so hard. But once they get it, it grows. Maria, because you were doing the thing about like, what it was like to walk or something. And so to understand that all of those little actions are really important in terms of providing the feelings. And in that way, it does seem to me, because I think at one point in the discussion there was something about like, is it like a play or not? But to me it is, because you are kind of scripting the image of what the character is doing. But I really enjoyed listening to all your experiences writing. I can really relate to that.
What do you teach?
Well, I taught second grade.
Okay.
I taught second grade for a long time. And then I taught gifted, and I did an outreach program with TC to teach kids that wouldn't normally be picked up. So they were trying to do that, and they were trying to make it like to teach kids in homeless, in shelters and stuff. So it was really interesting. Yeah. But I agree. You do learn. It can go both ways. Actually, I think it toggles back and forth. You write and you read, and then you write, you teach, back and forth, and you want to have both experiences going on at the same
Yeah, I
time.
agree, I agree very much.
Anyhow.
And you learn a lot by teaching too. Like I like to tell my students that I didn't know anything about grammar until I had to teach it.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, is
you
that
have to
true?
explain
Very
it,
true.
right? And so I think that's true even of the creative process.
Well, you know, it's interesting, if I can just, my sister lost her vision, had sudden vision loss, and I don't, and so she's been wanting to write about that. So she, you know, had gotten started writing something and said, you know, would you come out to Santa Fe and stay for a week and just really, you know, well, twist my arm,
Yeah.
go out to Santa Fe. So I did, and what I was brought back, and I think of it in terms of bird by bird, is that you read something and there's like about 10 things that you would want to say, you know, oh, that's kind of a cliche there, or, you know, that's, you know, you've already said that, that's kind of redundant, or anyhow, you know, like you were talking about, can you teach a skill?
Mhm.
And, well, there's certain things. So when I read what she had written, it was interesting because probably about, you know, 5 to 10 things immediately hit me as, oh, you know, this needs to be worked on, this needs to be worked on. But, you know, just knowing you're not gonna do it, you have to go bird by bird,
Yeah.
one thing. And so it was amazing. We just focused on dialogue, you know, like, can you remember? And then she kind of was able to remember things in terms of a conversation. And then, and this is what I'm sure you've all experienced, which is so much fun, is when you see them, you know, whatever your student, you know, wherever they are, is they think like a writer. And they just get that. And so one morning she came down and she said, you know, I was in the shower and I was thinking this, and I
Always a
thought,
problem.
yay! Okay, that's great. You know, you're thinking about it, that's so.
Well, also she
Anyway,
remembered
thank
it. So
That's right, she
the thing,
remembered it.
that She remembered it after.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a question behind you. Yes.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. You were mentioning in your presentation that maybe I missed, but I didn't see the motivation that the students have to have in order to write, right? And currently, the education system, they've been criticizing a lot, you know, it's too rigid, and they're not really making effort, especially for some populations. I'm advocating for the Spanish population, for instance. Over here in this presentation of writer, I don't see even one Spanish author that they can communicate and maybe interchange ideas, right? The same thing in the schools. I mean, you give books to read the students, and they're not related to their life at all. And how they gonna have the motivation to write or do something. So my question is, what do you think about this education system today, right? And as authors, are you doing anything to reach this kind of population, like the Spanish population? Because it's increasing every year, you know, even for the elections and some other activities. I remember my teachers, you know, I remember the crazy ones. Like yeah, they used to come, like you said, I remember one teacher in college. He was crazy. He used to come like this, Don Quixote with spade or whatever. He was pouring the ground and everything. That's the way I learned literature. And Okay, the thing is,
So your question basically, right, is how do teachers motivate students to engage with literature,
Diversity.
to write?
yeah,
Diversity.
that's one small
Diversity,
question,
yeah.
but also about the education system. I don't think it's very unequal, you know, how you're gonna reach
Yeah.
some, especially if you talk about New York and some of the places, right? Even here, you know, like I said, you know, how we gonna integrate these Spanish people? You know, I don't see anybody.
So I know Betty and I taught in a school that has a large Hispanic population. Most of them are first-generation English speakers. So their parents may speak English, but their parents learned it as a second language, but the kids, it's their first language, equal in Spanish. And I've had some incredible experiences with those students. They're like any other student, they're motivated inwardly motivated both by what their families experience and their own needs. So I had one girl whose father used to tell the family stories, make up stories and tell native stories that he remembered from his youth. And she was the most amazing writer in English. She would sometimes refer to his stories and sometimes make up her own stories. And she moved around. She was in 8th grade. She'd already been in 13 different schools. And she left before the end of the year. We corresponded for a year. She used to send me stories because she saw how much I loved them. So do I personally have the feeling of wanting to work with the writers who are writing in Spanish? Yes. I also lived in Mexico, so I was lucky that I spoke some Spanish so I could communicate with Hispanic kids. But we don't have the time to teach everybody in class. So there was an assumption that the people who were in my class weren't in need of learning in English and learning in Spanish. In other words, that my English teaching would be enough for them. So I couldn't teach them Spanish. I couldn't teach them English, they already knew that, but I could give them books about their heritage or experiences that other kids of that, experience had. And so I would teach it by making available, suggesting titles that related to their experience and to their past. Does that answer your question? I don't think enough of it is done in
But in general, in the system, that's not the case, you just give the kids some reading that it's absolutely not related with the heritage. Especially in these cities that they have the majority of the population, the Hispanic. Now, we are over here, I think I'm kind of new in Norwalk. I've been living like 3 years only, but I didn't know too much about the Spanish population, but I think there is a lot. I don't see anybody here.
Joe, you want to respond?
Can I just want to address, sir, I just wanted to say, so I'm a children's book author and illustrator.
A very good one, by the way.
Thank you.
Josephine.
Thank you. And I can tell you that it is a problem in the school, in our white heterosexual schools, that dominate the culture. But I can tell you from going to multiple conferences in the children's book industry, they are looking for diverse stories. They are looking for children of color. They are looking for children from different parts of the world. They are looking for different experiences. Is it good? No. Is it getting better? Yes, I think it is. So be patient and talk to teachers and introduce yourself to teachers in the school district, or write a letter to the superintendent, or write an op-ed for the newspaper. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Let me add
Thank
to
you,
that.
that's an important,
One small
Go ahead.
comment.
I'm
I'm sorry, one small comment. The community college, I'm in the program for seniors. It's
Oh,
excellent.
great.
Maybe I should take your class. That's all.
That would be great.
I just wanted to say that I'm a preschool teacher, and the majority of my class is a Head Start class in Norwalk, and the majority of the families speak Spanish. The percentage has gone up every single year, and we just had a family that came recently from Honduras, and other families from Mexico, Colombia, and every day, these children bring so much joy to my life. I learn through them. They're speaking English, speaking Spanish. Our goal is to, prepare them in kindergarten, and some of them come in knowing zero English, and by the end, they're talking, communicating, teaching their parents English. I noticed when I went to the book sale, the majority of the books that I got were English and Spanish. So they had the English and they had the Spanish.
Here at the library.
Here at the library. So my bookshelf has English books, it has Spanish books. We want these children to the best for them, and help them be more independent, learn and grow. And they're a joy to my life every single day.
Yes, thank you. Nettie?
Yeah, one of the things, when I first came to this country, I could only write Jamaican. I could speak English, but I could only write Jamaican. And I remember in my undergraduate, I had to go to a writing class to learn how to write American. Because my words were so many, coming from a British system. Now I had to learn how to speak American. Guess where I went? Channel 13.
There you go.
Channel 13 was my best teacher. Every Saturday morning, I would get up for Channel 13.
Yep.
And I learned American English. And then I understood, oh, that's why they're laughing. So when I taught internationally, I did international training. My background is in adult education. She didn't know that. So when I did that, I used that same method when I go into different countries to have the students tell me their story from their perspective so I can learn how to reach them. So it's about telling the story of you in your language and then bringing it to a teacher to let them understand where you are in your writing. And that's how my writing was corrected. That's how my American got renewed from the old British system. So for whatever it is, sometimes we have to not be afraid to get to the teachers and explain to the teachers what we are going through and why we're not understanding certain things.
And I agree that schools can do more and should do more.
Yeah.
And not just for students that speak Spanish or Haitian Creole, or in my 20 years of teaching, I had students from India, I had students from the Philippines, I had three students from Poland, I had students from Greece, I had students from all over Latin America, all over South America. And they would get in class and they would disagree about, about what means what. But I think the schools need more books, more materials, more teachers that are bilingual or trilingual. I agree with you on that. And getting more types of stories into, I'm glad that my daughter, who's a teacher there, found a lot of books in both English and Spanish for young children, because I think that's very, very important.
I also think it's public advocacy. The state community college system is in the process of consolidation from 12 community colleges to one, Behemoth Community College. It's going on YouTube, there goes my job. And it is supposedly students first, And I gotta tell you, there is nothing students first about that process. And they are doing things like eliminating the ESL department. Now,
Well-
how is that gonna help your community? It isn't gonna help your community, right? So we need public advocates, and we need people who aren't community college professors, right? Standing up and saying, you know what, this does not serve our community because it doesn't have anything to do with students. It has to do with what you perceive the bottom line to be, right? And it's also about public spending. Where do you want your dollars to go, right? And there's always money, but you have to specify where you want that money to go rather than being told. right,
Why don't
by
you bring
somebody
that
else.
forum here and
About
invite the
community
community?
colleges?
Invite the community to be educated about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
And
Well, I just,
That's a whole other.
yeah. I do want to just piggyback, so that's not directly what we were talking about, but it is very related. The other thing that they're getting rid of, you would think there'd be a little flexibility, given that we've just come through a pandemic, is developmental education, which in the old days was called remedial.
Right.
Now, who do you think are many of the students who are in that? A lot of students who have come through ESL
That's right.
programs because they're still improving. Also kids with all kinds of, just some kids who just need a little boost, but also kids who have learning issues. I'm calling them kids, they're young adults, but, but all kinds of people are going to not have the extra support that they've had for all these years. And I haven't been involved in the discussions, I've been reading about them, but it didn't make sense before. It makes no sense now after a pandemic when we all are reading how students have fallen behind. But they're sticking with the plan. I mean, they're delaying it a little bit, but nothing to do with the pandemic. That's not why. It's just the problem of implementing, getting rid of developmental stuff. And I'm not saying that because it affects me, because I teach other English too. It doesn't matter. But it will affect our students greatly. Getting rid of the ESL programs, getting rid of developmental education, the whole thing, it is on with Laurel. It's not going too well.
So there's not enough pushback, you're saying?
Oh, there's
Oh,
pushback.
there's been huge pushback.
Huge
I mean, I think
pushback.
something like 90-something% of the community college professors think it's all been going very badly.
Yeah.
So, but
Huge pushback.
anyway, but I did
That's
want
a
to.
long other
A
discussion.
long other discussion. There was just one thing on this point that I wanted to say that I just didn't want to leave unsaid, which is that there is a political, push now in certain places by some people to get rid of exactly what you're talking about, to get rid of any kind of, other cultural stuff, other diversity, because somehow it's perceived as being threatening to white children. And for the life of me, I don't understand that. I don't understand why. It's not a zero-sum game in my mind. It's like, why not have, lots of great stuff about white children, whatever that is, and stuff about, diversity and all its different forms, including women. I mean, when we were growing up, a whole lot of what we learned was only about white men, not too much about anybody else. And not white men of any interesting other religions either, or anything. I mean, just sort of, whatever. And so that's an issue. And so if people want to continue to have interesting diversity and more of it, which is needed in schools, people definitely have to advocate. And I think and to do so in a non-threatening way. Just to say, hey, we're not trying to take anything away here. We're only trying to make things more interesting. And honestly, it was really fun when I started to see, things that were just more diverse and more interesting, and especially, the food. I'm not trying to be shallow, but let's face it. So, but,
Tell that to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I know. So,
Anyhow, well, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate your questions and your attention. And,
Joe, you should talk to Cindy. You should come please next year if you want.